started. Okay, Tansy, hello. Welcome everyone to today's session, Indigenous Approaches, Being a Helper Where Invited. This is the fourth webinar in our 6-part online learning series on decolonizing community-based research, taking place over the winter and spring 2021. And this series is hosted by Community-Based Research Canada. My name is Julia Coburn. I'm the moderator for today's session and the CBRCanada program coordinator. So just to get us started, I wanted to share a short territorial acknowledgement and respectfully acknowledge that CBRCanada is situated on the traditional territory of the neutral Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee peoples. In the spirit of reconciliation, CBRCanada is committed to engaging with and learning from diverse Indigenous peoples across Canada, as well as addressing the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's calls to actions. I wanted to share one call to action every webinar, and this one we wanted to draw the attention to action 4. So hopefully you had a chance to read this while I was speaking. And a quick introduction to Community-Based Research Canada. Our mission is to advance community-based research excellence in Canada by strengthening partnerships, bridging capacity, mobilizing knowledge, and championing CBR among individuals, communities, and institutions. For 10 years, CBRCanada has brought together key players of community campus partnerships. So during this webinar, please share your questions and comments in either the chat box or the question box, and we'll have about 15 minutes at the end of the webinar to share. Okay, so and also the webinar is being recorded, so you can refer back to this at a later time by going to our website, communityresearchcanada.ca/webinars and discussions. So without further ado, it is my absolute pleasure to welcome today's speaker, Dr. Sarah Wright Cardinal. Sarah is Cree and an assistant professor in the School of Child and Youth Care at the University of Victoria. Her work centers the importance of healing from colonial disruptions to Indigenous identities and addressing these fractures with land and spirit-based teachings and practices that contribute to community wellness. She holds a short partnership development grant with the Pacheedaht Nation to develop a model of healthy youth identity development in a rural and remote Indigenous community. I'm informed by a previous project to gather youth stories and mentorship with Coast Salish and mutual knowledge keepers in preparation for the West Coast Intertribal Canoe Journeys. She's also the co-lead on a BC Ministry of Child and Family Development funded project called Cultural Connections for Indigenous Children in Care to inform child welfare policies and practice. Sarah's journey includes being raised away in the 60s scoop and coming home as an adult to learn from elders, aunties, and knowledge keepers. She lives with her partner, 3 of their children, and 1 grandchild on reserve in Coast Salish territory. So welcome, Sarah, and thank you everybody for being here today. Welcome, Sarah, and enjoy this wonderful webinar.
Thanks so much, Julia. I'm sorry, could you remind me if I should keep my camera on now?
Yes, please do.
Okay, great, thank you. Thanks so much, and thanks everyone for joining us this morning. I'm here at home in the village of Sayotsin, which is Sauk Nation, one of the Coast Salish nations in relationship with the University of Victoria. Sayotsin is also called Reserve 2 in Sauk, and I humbly acknowledge that I live here, married into the nation, and we are raised, as Julia mentioned, raising our family here. I'm sorry. As Julia mentioned, I'm Cree from Northern Treaty 8 Territory. My home community is Fort Smith, Northwest Territories. And you can see that up you can see if you move from the West Coast up north, you can see that star to show my home community. And then if you travel over further east to the other blue star, I was mostly raised in Algonquin territory. Next slide. Next photo. Tanse nisikasun Sarah Wright Cardinal, Kaskewa wanochinia, Nimusam Narcisse Cardinal, Ekwano Kamaget Dejule Ikosi. These are my grandparents, Narcisse Cardinal and Agathe Dejule, and that's a photo of us shortly after I was born. I've just shared with you in Baby Talk a small introduction of who I am and my connection to my homelands. And I say it's Baby Talk because this is the way that our children learn in Aboriginal Head Start or kindergarten how to introduce themselves. And my journey of reclaiming language and cultural teachings started in my 20s. So I'm still young in my learning, and I very much know that our languages are the ways to understand our worldviews. And so I continue to try to practice and continue on my language learning journey. This next photo I really love. It's a photo of my granny on the land. My family, my mom was raised on the land with my grandparents, and this photo is from spring hunt, and my granny is getting ready to prepare the moose. And one of the stories that my mom shared with me about how my granny used to work with a moose hide, I learned that all parts of the animal are used, that we care, that we respect our relative, the moose, for giving their life, and not only to nourish us, but to clothe us and to be able to have tools and instruments. So one of the things that was very, that I've held on to since this was shared with me is that how my granny would be able to use the brain to tan the hide, what the different bones were used for scraping the hide, and what was used for medicines as well as for ceremony. And it will always stick with me that the brain of the animal is the exact size needed to be able to prepare the hide or tan the hide. So that's always stuck with me. The next photo is also an important photo. There's my granny again. This photo is of the receiving home, the first floor of Fort Smith Hospital. The other picture of me with my grandparents is also in Fort Smith Hospital in another wing. I was there in the maternity ward. My grandfather was there in a palliative care ward, and on the first floor was the receiving home, where my granny, she's holding one of our young relatives in that photo. She's a traditional midwife, and in our teachings, from what I've learned, our traditional midwives were there to guide on throughout the life journey. So catching babies, bringing them into the world, but also guiding and being there for important rites of passage at different times of life, including being there for the final journey from this life and into the spirit world. This photo is really, it speaks volumes because my home community had a residential school. So you can see in this photo in the 1950s, about 10 years before I was born, the school-age children with their haircuts, those children would be getting ready to go to the residential school. And then the younger children would be prepared for adoption and foster care and adoption. So that was my experience. And so we didn't know at the time that this was the only photo that would be taken of us together. And then this other photo I wanted to share today. This is of my youngest, of their gender fluid puberty rites of passage camp 2 years ago. It was very important for us to be able to learn how to do ceremony that respects our children who identify as queer and gender non-binary. And so we were able to do the processes that are involved to ask for this ceremony and to prepare for it in a good way, which takes about a year of planning and preparation. And so when we went home, this is in our home territory, to do this 4-day ceremony, so that our child and some other children would be able to walk strong in their identity, in their gender identities, and in our teachings. So because of my life journey, I was also able to participate in the camp. So again, I am a teenager in my knowledge, and I share that because it's so important that we are clear about who we are, the connections that we have, and the knowledge that we have, as well as the knowledge that we don't have. So where I'm at now in my life, I identify as an Oskapuis, which in Cree means a helper. It's usually a ceremonial helper. And I take that concept or the teachings around that to my work at the university, which is why I wanted to share today about what it means to me to be a helper in community-based research projects. Next. I thought this slide might be of interest to some of the visitors today. This is from the BC Association of Social Work, and I thought they have a reconciliation toolkit, and I like the questions that are asked in this toolkit, and I think that this is something that we can all reflect on. And I'll just highlight here. The first question does ask, what is your personal and family history that brought you to this land? So I really like to reflect on that, given that I am also, I was an uninvited visitor to this territory and then went through some protocols to become a community member of a nation. However, I am from away, and I come with different teachings and a different worldview. And so I find this to be a very helpful question for all of us, as well as having an awareness of the history of the land that we live and work on, and what sources we draw on for this information is also very important. And thinking about a few of the other webinars that have already been shared, it's helpful for us to consider how our families or ancestors have been impacted by colonization, oppression, structural violence, or war, and what our understandings are of the impacts of colonial violence against Indigenous communities, and to have some framing around that here in Canada. So for example, I'm at home in Sayotsan, and we say, where are you? I'm in Sayotsan. Oh, okay, I'll be there in 5 minutes. But we also translate that to Res 2 or Reserve 2. And so there is this possibility of knowledge translation that happens regularly between how we frame who we are and our relationship to place in Indigenous languages and ways of knowing, and then translate that into our Canadian state ways of naming. And I just put in brackets here in number 5, education. So it's always helpful for us to understand the role that our professions play in colonization, and including the residential schools, the colonial processes of removal of children from their families. And okay, we're getting a little beyond my talk today, but also it's always helpful for us to consider what reconciliation means given this time and context of the TRC. Next. So I thought that this would be a nice way of introducing Indigenous knowledge systems. This is from a brief that I wrote for the Ministry of Education here while we were working on bringing Indigenous language programming across BC schools. Indigenous knowledge is a living process, a lived curriculum that comes from the history, cultures, beliefs, and values of each nation. Each nation has its own natural laws, ways of being, ways of knowing, and ways of doing. Being in relationship with all living beings and honoring the spirit of each being is very important in Indigenous knowledge systems. I chose this photo again from home. This is the smoke hole from our smokehouse teepee while we are in fall camp preparing meat. And next. So I'd like the next set of slides are from a project that I led with Pachidat in 2019. And these slides were prepared by and with the youth of the project. So I selected a few of the slides for us to be able to go through a bit of a journey for about 15 to 20 minutes on being a helper in an Indigenous project. This particular project was called Language, Land and Healing, Gathering Youth Stories of Preparing for Tribal Journey. It was a SSHRC-funded project, and that artwork is the paddle design for the paddles that we carved, and we were able to make t-shirts for everybody who in the community who participated. And next. So we framed this as an Indigenous land, water, and spirit-based project, 6 months of preparations for Tribal Canoe Journey 2019. We offered 4 workshops in community: drum making, paddle making, canoe safety and teachings, cedar harvesting and weaving. And each of the workshops and teachings were led by elders and knowledge keepers from Pachidat and relatives Ditidat and Sauk. And next. So the way that we approached this project was that the youth were researchers in the project. Each youth was given a tablet so that they could take photos during each of the workshops. We were documenting the steps in each of these workshops, and we were, our question was around how youth learn from mentors. And so we also had the youth do some writing, and we started it out with sticky notes and just invited youth to put 3 words at the end of the workshop on their sticky notes. And it was a way into expressing ourselves in writing and getting comfortable with expressing ourselves this way. And so over the course of the 4 workshops, we were able to get to the point where we could share more thoughts, with and be able to put some phrases together for our PowerPoint, and then also be able to have a circle interview at the end of our project together. So here, one of the youth said it was fun. I liked making the drums and I liked lacing the drums. And the youth chose that all the quotes that were shared would be the youth as a collective. And then next. So from the drum making workshop, here's the wordle of the youth words. And as I mentioned, the approach to this project involved all of the community that was engaging, all of the community that was preparing for Tribal Journey in order to be able to have that knowledge sharing with parents and family, extended family, elder youth connection. So it was really the community coming together. Next. And from paddle making, so we were able to purchase a fiberglass canoe, a large a warrior canoe for this project in the new channel style. And here are the paddles that the youth carved for the canoe and that stay with the canoe. And some more youth words about paddle making. Next. We were able to have a canoe blessing ceremony in order to put the canoe in the water in a good way. And these photos and information comes from the Hashisa newspaper, so the New Channel newspaper that did some coverage of the event. And I really loved the framing of this because it centered the work of the nations and the knowledge transmission. Ditidat helps Pachidat revive culture at canoe blessing ceremony in preparation for paddle to Lummi. And elected Chief Jeff Jones said that it was a very important day for us and marks the return to our traditions. It was very interesting to see the difference between Indigenous news coverage and mainstream news coverage. So some of the other news clippings focused more on me, my expertise, the amount of funding, and very much more languaged around me as a professor going into a community, and it had more of an extractionist tone, whereas the Indigenous coverage was very much an honoring of the intention of this project. Next. And a quote from a youth participant: "It's wonderful for me to be able to come back here and learn about our culture and traditions," which was the goal of our project. So on the left, you can see our canoe that before it was being carried into the water, a little bit of the opening there as well. Some of the elders and knowledge keepers who were guiding us on this project, and also leadership who shared their words. Next. And this was a quote from me about Indigenous resurgence. It is about Indigenous families, communities, and nations reclaiming their teachings and practices. And in this project, we're working with youth, knowledge keepers, and elders to support community wellness and to bridge this wellness with university learning. So it was very powerful to witness the canoe being blessed and going into the water in a good way, and seeing, being able to witness this was really powerful. And of course, we had a community feast to celebrate, which is so important in our working community, that we always take the time to eat and visit. Next. So then we were able to do canoe teachings and paddle practice, and it was great to hear from youth that it felt good to be on the water again, and that leaders need to keep at teaching our youth. Voice is powerful, sing, count, whatever helps keep the rhythm. So now the youth are really getting comfortable with opening up about what they're learning and being able to share back with me, because I am holding the role of a university researcher. Next. And again, here's some more wordle of the paddle practice. And this is out in Pachidat, which is called Port Renfrew. It's about an hour and 10 minutes down the highway from Sauk on the very west coast, so of the island. Next. And then we did cedar harvesting and weaving so that we could make headbands for regalia. And it was really beautiful to be taken out on the land to a sacred place and be able to do this, and to be able to be taught how to respect the cedar relative. Next. And so again, some more youth photos and their PowerPoint. And this was weaving headbands, and you can see some on the right-hand side, some of the headbands that were completed. All of the, so the paddles stayed with the canoe. The drums were gifted to everybody in the project, and the headbands and the regalia, the vests and shawls stay with the nation as well for future events and cultural ceremonies. Next. So this project culminated in the Paddle to Lummi 2019. So the West Coast Tribal Journeys, it's an intertribal summer ceremony where Nuu-Channel, Coast Salish, and Kwakwaka'wakw nations paddle in from all 4 directions to the nation who is hosting. So that could be anywhere on Vancouver Island, some of the mainland, and Washington State. And so you paddle from village to village and engage in protocol to request permission to come ashore, to visit with extended family and neighboring nations, and then paddle in to the grand landing at the host community. So after some days of camping and paddling, we arrived in Lummi. And so there is my community partner, Roxy Jones, the director of Pachirat Health Center, who sends her warm greetings today. And she said that we've established a stronger relationship with our neighboring nation, Ditirat, and we have worked diligently towards revitalizing our culture, our songs, our language, and teachings came back to life. After over 25 years, we are now able to dance and will continue to do so. Our culture is very important, and it's something we will always be proud of and continue for our future generations. Kleko, kleko. Thank you so much, Yuvik. And so you can see our canoe there that was painted black in the New Channel style. And you can see the youth who had been preparing for 6 months with guidance and love and care, knowledge keepers and elders, and the skipper at the back who prepared to be able to do this. And it was very powerful to witness. And next. So this project was framed as Pachirat Nation Reclaiming New Channel Ways. So with the opportunity to do that project together, there was a new canoe and paddles and safety gear that is the nation's and stays with the nation. And I share this photo of 3 generations of a family with the drums and regalia that we were able to prepare for this very important journey. And this is a public ceremony, and it was streamed. And so this is the bottom photo would have been a live stream image of when we had the floor for protocol in the Lummi Big House, and brought these songs and dances to life after they had been sleeping for a number of years. Next. So I wanted to share briefly what we learned from this project with regards to Indigenous approaches to research. The first thing we learned is that the university partner is a helper. This is really important because, as I shared, the difference between the way that the Indigenous newspaper framed our project and the way that the mainstream newspaper framed our project, I really want to avoid that type of framing that the Victoria newspaper chose. And so in order to do this work in a good way, I need to have my 2 ears for listening and my 1 mouth for speaking, so that I am thoughtful about my words and the power that I have, given that I'm representing a university institution. And one of the reasons I love community-based research so much is that my education journey was rocky. I repeated my last year of high school in Comox, and going to university wasn't a straightforward path for me. Community-based research and community-based projects invites us to engage folks who often haven't had positive experiences with formal education or research. And I know a previous webinar shared more detail about the history of colonial research. So I just again mention that it fits very well for me to be an Oskapwis or a helper and to go about the work in this way. And I'm very interested or open to talk more about that and engage the group. The next thing we learned is that community leads the purpose and approach to the project. So I'm also engaged. I also have community engaged projects such as the MCFD funded project that Julia mentioned. But for community-led projects, it really is about the community or nation guiding the purpose of the project, the approach to the project. Very important because it is not knowledge that I am bringing into the community. It is me supporting a community with their own knowledge. The next thing we learned is to be flexible. I know we often, we prepare proposals with timelines and the steps of our projects, and we put a lot of thought into this, and we want our projects to be able to be done in timely ways. And I find with projects in community, it's important to be flexible, to go with the flow of the community, and that in relational ways, if there's a passing in the community, if there's some other important event, or if it's harvesting time, a particular time of year, all of these activities take precedence to my timeline as a researcher. So within that, the knowledge keepers, the elders or old ones that lead the workshops and teachings, they also guide me, and I'm there as a helper. And when I have students working with me, we are there as helpers. And for this particular project, although I would say with all the projects, what we develop or what we do together stays in the community. It's really important that everything that is prepared stays with the community. And for this particular project, it was really helpful that the workshops were open to all community members who were engaging in tribal journeys or thinking about engaging, because as part of a sort of resurgence, and it was important to have this open for everybody who wanted to be able to join and to create that knowledge exchange between children, youth, adults, and elders, especially with knowledge keepers traveling in from Ditidot, which is another hour or so down the highway on a secondary road. And so this was very much a time for us to gather together, to share knowledge and to listen and learn. And this photo is so powerful. This photo is from day one, the first landing that we did. We paddled into Suquamish, and the skipper was able to do the protocol to introduce the Canoe family and to ask permission to come ashore. And again, it was just so powerful to witness and to have a small part in this resurgence and revitalization of new channel knowledge in this particular community. Next. So I frame my work as healing from colonial disruptions to Indigenous identities. And what I mean by that is a paradigm shift from hegemony. So these hegemonic discourses are the colonial discourses that tend to be about Indigenous people as other, and framing us in ways of that aren't strength-based ways. So deficit ways, or individualized, viewed as individualized problems instead of structural or systemic issues. So on the left, this is my picture of hegemony. And on the right is my picture of spirit-based. So in my work, I invite this paradigm shift to step out of hegemonic discourses and into spirit-based discourses, which I frame as reconnecting to sophisticated knowledge systems that live in our ceremonies and nations' teachings. Next. So much of my work to date, I came down to UVic in 2012 to complete a PhD. and now I'm an assistant professor. So these are some thoughts on my journey over the past 9 years, shifting from being in community and coming down to the university and having a second career later in life. And most of my speaking engagements have been more so on decolonizing and 60 Scoop. So, and when I'm asked in speaking engagements if I could share just a few final words of wisdom, these are the words that I like to share. This is a photo of Caribou Island. This is my maternal family homeland. And the view is this view, we're looking out. We are downriver from the tar sands. And if you, this view here looking downriver would have been the view of from my family's camp back in the day. So being able to return there as an adult and be able to sit on that rock, and we were there for ceremony as well. It's very powerful to me, a very powerful connection. So I just share this as a few wrap-up words, that it's so important that we learn the history of these lands, the lands that we live on, that we work on, the lands that we are from, to listen to stories of healing and wellness so that we can it's so important to understand the history, and it's also important that we can engage in strength-based narratives. And also, I invite everyone to be gentle with yourselves and each other. Naskomen haichka.
Thank you so much, Sarah. I'm just going to put myself back on. That was absolutely amazing. And thank you for walking us through your own journey, giving us some history of that, and this particular project that you've been diving in deep. It's beautiful to see just everything that took place, the beautiful art and the reconnection to culture, and it really went deep. So I want to stop and take some of your questions, actually. So just to remind everybody, so this webinar is being recorded. I know that many people are often interested, so you can find it later. So yeah, let's take some of your questions now. I'm just going to take a look and see if you've written in the chat or in the Q&A, please do. I can see, actually, I may start with one of my own. I'm actually curious, what are different ways that a university or people working in a university institution can be a helper? What might that look like? And that may be different depending on their role in the institution, their connection to the community. Maybe just getting some ideas.
Thanks, Julia. Yes, that slide on self-location, I believe it's really important that we, the relational connections are key to community-based work. I work with nations that I'm invited to work with, or communities that I'm in relationship with. So having those relationships are really important. So if somebody's starting out, that would be learning about the lands that they are working and living on, and engaging local nations. And in previous work, when I would guide Bachelor of Education students who were preparing to be teachers, I tried to remind that these are reciprocal relationships. So, and that some mindfulness that the same community people can be called on, for often, and that it might be part of a cultural practice to say yes, or to want to be able to share. So I do just try to gently remind that these are reciprocal relationships. So what is it that I can give back? What am I offering, and what am I giving in return for the sharing of their knowledge or and this relationship? And so that will look different for different people. And so for some of us, that might be more of a sort of community engaged project. And we might have a relationship or relationships where we're being guided on to ensure that the language that we are using is culturally appropriate or culturally sensitive, or that some of the approaches that we are doing are acknowledging the colonial harms. And it depends again on our relationships and as those relationships grow. So I chose, instead of showing a few different projects quickly, I decided to go in depth with one project. From this project, we now have a larger project where the centerpiece is carving a cedar canoe. We can do that now because of the work we did already. So it's also, I believe, having patience and a perspective that relationships are long-term. And so this work will grow over time. The good feelings that are put out come back very easily in this work.
That's really nice. And I guess also there may be a point of thinking being a helper may look different if you don't have to be in the community necessarily doing the work. Maybe being a helper is kind of helping others that are doing the work to do it, and kind of understanding what that means. So yeah. I wonder, I've got a few questions here popping up, actually quite a few. So thanks, everybody.
I do want to acknowledge Elder, I'm sorry, I'm not sure how to open it all the way. So I just see Elder Waba. Just want to acknowledge the elder that posted in the chat this morning, and thank you so much for being here today. And I hope that my words are reflective of my intention, and that those good feelings are being heard.
Thank you, Sarah. And I know I could see also, unfortunately, I can't read your full name, Elder Waba. But I love that you're mentioning that it's birthday today as well. And so Wabagoon, I could see. Elder Wabagoon. So thank you for reminding us of that as well. That's very important. So some amazing questions coming in here today. I want to start with Cynthia. So I'm very interested in hearing more about the different ways Indigenous media and non-Indigenous media portrayed your work. How can universities help frame stories within the media in a non-colonial way? Very interesting.
Yeah, could you repeat that question again? I was just reading what our elder wrote, and I'm sorry, Julia, that I'm over talking you here. And I just
no, that's okay.
Acknowledge Elder Wabagoon's words here, and I am very much looking forward to connecting. Thanks so much. Great. And
oh, beautiful.
So what's our question?
I'm so happy to hear that. Of course. So Cynthia was asking about how can universities help frame, basically she was saying, I'm very interested in hearing more about the different ways Indigenous media and non-Indigenous media portrayed your work. How can universities help frame stories within the media in a non-colonial way?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I certainly learned from that particular project because it had a fair amount of media attention. And so when I wrote the press release with some other folks, I think even though we tried to write it in, we language, community-centered language, we might have been able to do that a bit differently. I think that next time I would reach out to my contact at the Indigenous newspaper and ask her how we could write that press release differently. So I think that's something I could do differently. The other thing that I want to mention is that I have seen some research done, and I just need to think about it so I can bring it next when we get back together next time on this particular topic. And I believe it was a graduate student's work on the difference between mainstream media headings and articles and Indigenous articles on Indigenous issues, and how mainstream media tends to portray us in these deficit ways, and ways that can anger the public or misinform the public. So I will bring that for when we come back as one of the links that could be looked at.
That'd be great.
So news reporters are people. They need to get the scoop for their work. And so I don't feel that we have too much control over what a news source will choose to write, because it will reflect that media outlet and what their how they write their news. So but I do think that we can be mindful when we are interviewed to always put the community first, to have the community partners interviewed, to ensure that what we share is reflective of the community, and to not sort of take the center stage, because we do get the centers, those of us on here who are professors, we do get the center stage plenty, and this isn't the place to take center stage.
Mm-hmm. I can see a comment from Elder Wabagoon, and thank you so much. That if it's okay if I just share, we write it or work with the journalist or writer to ensure that it's written in a good way. So thank you so much for sharing that. Lots of other questions. So I'm going to ask another one from this Q&A. So hi, first of all, I wanted to thank you for sharing this with us. You mentioned how difficult your time was in a Canadian university. I may have misheard. Did you mention there was an article published about this? If so, may I please get the name of this article?
Yes. So, the newspaper article, you can look up, if you Google Diddy Dot helps Pachida, that title, if you Google Diddy Dot helps Pachida or revives Pachida culture, you'll see a few different articles come up. And sorry, Sook, but this particular article was the Sook Mirror, and I think it will give you a good sense of the difference between colonial writing and Indigenous writing.
So thank you. And people are sharing also some other pieces with in terms of media, and looking at CBC show Unreserved and Reclaimed, and asking, are there any other good sources, or maybe even with Sarah or others in the chat can share other good media sources we may go to to kind of find a different framing of these narratives.
Yeah, so here on the island, in these territories, Indigenous, that's a news source, and my understanding is affiliated with CBC, and they recently invested in more Indigenous reporters to be able to focus on the good work that is happening in community, and sometimes that does involve university as well. So that is, I can write in here too, right?
Yes, yeah, please do. Actually, that would be fantastic.
Indigenous, yeah. Yeah.
That sounds really great. Okay, and
again, I can also bring some links and resources next week based on the conversation in the chat.
That would be wonderful, Sarah. And yeah, just a reminder to everybody, I know we have some more time for a question and answer. We definitely want to do that, but to join us next week. Well, we're going to be having a longer question kind of discussion. So whereas it's kind of us talking to you this week, next week it's going to be all of us talking with each other. And so everybody that comes to the table will have an active role in the conversation. So yeah, look forward to seeing you, whoever is interested in coming to that session as well. So we have more questions. I want to keep trying to get through as many as we can. I've got another a question from Anne. She was saying, I really appreciated your comment about events in the community taking priority, such as a passing of a community member or a harvesting ceremony. This has been my experience too, but research funding agencies do not always understand the importance of this. Do you have thoughts on how we can help research organizations understand this concept and acknowledge it as a principle? I think it speaks to the spiritual aspect of research that are not always acknowledged.
Yes, I absolutely agree. And if you're at a university, if you're here today from a university partner, my understanding is that universities are in different stages of decolonizing their ethics, their human research ethics processes. And it's been shared with me that UVic is quite progressive compared to some other universities. So I've found that there's been some work done at the administrative level and within the university to figure out how we can do projects in good ways and be able to pay people properly, be able to leave the resources in the community. So some of that work does need to be done at the institution. Also, if you are in a university, the faculty that I'm in and the school that I'm in, we recently engaged in updating it's called standards document for faculty. So when you go up for reappointment or tenure, the criteria of what you need to meet. And in that document, we put some effort into language around Indigenous and community engaged research, because these projects do take longer. And so can't be measured in the same way as another research project where it might result in a certain number of academic articles. So I could also pull together like a one-pager of thoughts on that as well, because of what we've done to language that we've used to recognize the work and be able to share that languaging in different spaces so that there can be more understanding of what's involved in healthy or good community engaged or community led research. So I could pull that together as well, and I can pull that together with some language around if you're working in a university or if you're working in a community organization, and either way needing to engage funder or research ethics or the institution.
That would be really valuable. Thank you, Sarah, for offering to share that, because yeah, there's so many aspects of this approach to community-based research that you've been undertaking. And even just, I was making note of the 2 years of listening and, you know, the time it takes to really engage in the relationship building process. There's a lot happening that kind of maybe the traditional Western approach to research is not set up.
Yeah, and I found, for those of us who engage the Tri-Council funding, so SSHRC or NSERC or CIHR, I've found that in the past few years that there is more awareness that we need to strengthen Indigenous research in university. And so I was one of many participants in that dialogue 2 years ago a few years ago. And so I know, and I've been a reviewer for SSHRC grants, that in Ottawa. And I think that what we need to do when we write proposals that are intended to be Indigenous research, that we are very clear up front that that is the purpose of the project, that we self-locate, and so how we are coming into that project, and that I've noticed more recently that with Tri-Council, for example, they will have Indigenous projects reviewed together as Indigenous projects with some thought on some of those criteria that are specific to Indigenous ways of doing community projects. And so I'm finding that that dialogue is starting and that that approach is starting, but we're still in those early stages.
Yeah, and that's really promising to hear that. And that you're part of this process too, and so you have that kind of connection to see how things are changing, and so that provides a lot of hope to this. But I also, it's good to have these conversations and hear from, support others trying to do this work that maybe aren't as supportive of an environment as you might be. So that's really fantastic. And so I may try to ask one last question before we go. I know the time went by so fast. I've got a question from Susan that's, can you please expand on how some have not had positive experiences with the research and provide suggestions on how we can bridge these past experiences to move forward together?
That's a great question too. So I've made mistakes along the way and learned from those mistakes. And that's why I do mention that there is, for me, a difference between community engaged and community-led research. So in a community engaged project, I am coming up with the research question and I am identifying the issue, or a funder has reached out to me and they've identified an issue. That's a little different than community-led, where the community is approaching me or the team asking if we would like to work together on something that they are visioning and that they would like to address. So that in itself, I've become mindful of the difference between those two types of projects. And so where I have made more mistakes is in community engaged projects and not always being mindful of checking in and making sure that we are moving forward the way that we had agreed to, or if we need to make any changes. So in one community engaged project, our team includes a youth researcher, community youth researcher, former youth in care. And I recently apologized to her because I really need to acknowledge that I was speaking over her. And the project is all about former youth in care. And her wisdom at the table is key to us being able to work with the stories that have been shared and be able to put that together in a good way. And so I was very open in a recent team meeting, and I took responsibility for that, and I apologized to her. And I've made sure that our meetings our regularly scheduled team meetings start with our youth researcher. And so that's one small thing recently, or one of my recent mistakes, and then also doing the work that I needed to do with her one-on-one so that I could ensure that we still have a good relationship, or that I could rebuild that relationship. So I think it's just generally that we need to be willing to be as vulnerable as the participants or the community that we are engaging.
Thanks, Sarah. And everybody learns, right? And I think that's a good thing. That's the biggest thing, is kind of acknowledging, okay, wait a minute, this isn't right, and then stepping up and making that change and adjustment. And I think that really speaks volumes. And so unfortunately we're out of time, and I can see everybody so thankful for what you've shared today. I just want to share a couple of pieces for next steps for those that want to join next week before we go. So if you want to continue this conversation with Sarah and others that are interested in having this conversation, you can go to communityresearchcanada.ca/events and register for the discussion happening next week on this same theme. So we're going to be asking some questions and then engaging in a dialogue together with all of you. We're looking for speakers for our June session. So if you're interested in doing work on bridging Indigenous and Western research paradigms, so Sarah would be one person that's doing really great work in this, for example. But if others are interested in doing this work, we want to hear from you and see you, and please consider letting us know about you and joining this panel discussion. And we have in May 6th a celebration of mini gathering and awards gala coming up that we'd love for all of you to join as well, which is also on our events page. So, and please share your feedback as always. Thank you so much, Miigwech, Sarah. Thank you everybody for being here today, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks so much, everyone. Safe travels to your living room.